The morning sun bathed Greenwood Elementary School in a golden glow, its rays dancing across the shiny SUVs and minivans pulling up along the curb. Doors swung open, and children tumbled out with backpacks bouncing, their parents fussing over forgotten lunches and offering quick hugs. Laughter and chatter floated on the warm Georgia air, mixing with the chirping of birds and the distant rumble of school buses. Amid this cheerful chaos stood Ethan Miller, a slight 10-year-old with scuffed sneakers and a backpack that looked almost too big for his narrow shoulders. He lingered by the iron school gates, watching the other kids reunite with parents who pressed kisses to their foreheads or ruffled their hair before driving off. Ethan's eyes followed them longingly. His own mother, Carla, had already sped off in her battered sedan after dropping him at the corner. She had to be across town at the diner by 7 sharp. Ethan hugged his backpack tighter, trying to push down the nervous flutter in his stomach. Today was the big spelling test, and he desperately wanted to do well. Maybe even bring home a rare A to make his mother smile after her endless shifts. Just as he turned to hurry inside, something caught his frail figure across the street. An elderly woman stood at the curb, clutching 2 bulging grocery bags that pulled her shoulders down. As she shuffled forward, her foot caught a crack in the sidewalk, and she wobbled dangerously. Without thinking, Ethan darted over, nearly dropping his own books as he reached for the heavier bag. "Ma'am, let me help you with that," he said, his voice a little breathless. The woman, startled, looked down at him with wide grey eyes before her face softened into a warm, surprised smile. "Why, thank you, young man. That's very kind of you," she said, her tone carrying a gentle southern lilt. Ethan hoisted the bag with effort. It was heavier than it looked, steadied her elbow until they reached a nearby bench. Mrs. Eleanor Grant, as she introduced herself, settled down with a sigh of relief, still watching Ethan with an odd, searching expression, as though trying to place a memory. "You have a good heart," she murmured, almost to herself. Ethan ducked his head, cheeks pink. "I have to go, or I'll be late," he blurted, handing the lighter bag back to her and breaking into a clumsy jog toward the school entrance, breathless and worried about the ticking clock. Ethan cast one last glance over his shoulder. Mrs. Grant was still watching him, a pensive sadness flickering across her lined face. Then he disappeared through the doors, swallowed by the bustling hallway and the promise of spelling words that danced just out of reach. Outside, Mrs. Grant remained seated on the bench, her groceries at her side, eyes distant as though sifting through memories older than the cracked sidewalk beneath her feet. In that simple moment and anxious boy's kindness, an old woman's haunted gazer quiet mystery began to unfurl, one that neither of them could yet name. Ethan's world shrank every evening to the narrow walls of their small, dim apartment on the edge of town. Peeling wallpaper curled away from the corners, and the smell of old cooking oil clung to the air no matter how often Carla cracked open the windows. The living room doubled as Ethan's study space, his homework spread across a wobbly coffee table littered with past-due utility bills. Carla Miller moved like a ghost through the apartment after her long shifts, her shoulders hunched, her hair pulled back in a messy knot that seemed more grey than brown these days. She spent her days waiting tables at a diner off the highway and scrubbing floors in office buildings by night, chasing tips and overtime like lifelines. Though her exhaustion often spilled over into sharp words and heavy sighs, she remained fiercely protective of Ethan, shielding him from harsh truths wherever she could. Late at night, she sat by the kitchen counter, head bowed over the mountain of unopened envelopes, eviction notices tucked beneath grocery receipts, trying to figure out how to keep the lights on for just one more month. Ethan, despite everything, carried himself with quiet optimism. At Greenwood Elementary, he was known for his bright eyes and polite manner, though few classmates ever truly noticed him. His shirts were always a little too large, thrift store finds that Carla carefully patched when seams split. His backpack, faded and frayed at the edges, had belonged to another boy, once a cheerful cartoon patch, half torn off, but Ethan treated it like treasure. He paid attention in class, his hand shooting up for every spelling word, every math puzzle, eager to earn gold stars that he knew would make his mother's tired face glow with pride. Still, some children, like Trevor Simmons, whose father drove a gleaming Tesla and donated to the school's booster club, never missed a chance to sneer. "Hey Miller, did the food pantry run out of sandwiches today?" Trevor snickered more than once, and Ethan just ducked his head, cheeks burning. Sometimes he really did skip lunch, choosing instead to tuck away his free cafeteria milk for later, knowing there might not be much at home. Ms. Daniels, his soft-spoken homeroom teacher, had started to notice the pattern. She often slipped an extra granola bar onto his desk, or gently asked if he'd like to stay in during recess for a special reading assignment, giving him a chance to nibble on something without the other kids watching. Meanwhile, across town, Mrs. Eleanor Grant lived in a sprawling house, shaded by ancient oaks, their branches arching protectively over a driveway where expensive cars came and went, ferrying distant relatives or estate managers, widowed and long retired. Eleanor's days stretched out in lonely repetition, morning tea in her sunroom, tending to her roses, and long hours wandering through memory-laden halls, heavy with portraits of stern ancestors. Though her ledger was flush with investments and old family money, her heart felt emptier with each passing year. As a girl, Eleanor had known poverty well, threadbare dresses, hollow stomach, the shame of overdue rent. Her fortunes changed through marriage and inheritance, but the echoes of that hungry childhood still stirred in her chest, especially when she saw children like Ethan. That was why, despite the board's disapproval, Eleanor often visited Greenwood Elementary unannounced. She would sit on a bench just outside the playground, or stroll slowly by the fence, watching children shriek with laughter, play tag, or exchange the kind of easy smiles she rarely received these days. Greenwood was her late husband's Legucia, prestigious school run by a private trust. She controlled it. It prided itself on exclusivity, offering scholarships sparingly, favoring families who could donate generously. In recent months, Eleanor found herself questioning these rigid policies more and more. What good was all this carefully guarded wealth, all these manicured grounds and award-winning programs, if they didn't open more doors for children who needed them most? Sometimes her thoughts drifted back to her own ragged childhood friends, boys and girls whose brilliance dimmed under the weight of empty stomachs and closed doors. So while Ethan and Carla teetered on the edge of losing everything and paid rent, lurking like a wolf at their door-liner wandered her quiet estate, haunted by regrets and an ache for something more genuine than polite charity galas. She longed for a connection that might fill the hollow spaces wealth could not reach. Two lives running parallel, a tired mother and her gentle son fighting to keep a fragile foothold in a world that seemed stacked against them, and a lonely, old woman holding the keys to countless locked gates, yearning to find some piece of her past humility and warmth before it was too late. Their worlds, though divided by privilege and distance, were slowly winding toward each other, setting the stage for a meeting that might change them all. The Greenwood Elementary multipurpose room buzzed with chatter as parents shuffled into folding chairs, clutching tote bags and takeaway coffees. A banner that read "Partnering for Excellence" drooped slightly over the stage where Principal Hastings, a tall man with a severe part in his hair, adjusted the microphone with officious precision. Carla sat stiffly near the back, still in her waitress uniform, hoping to slip out quickly to get to her second cleaning job. Ethan was home with a neighbor, poring over spelling lists, blissfully unaware of how close their world teetered to the edge. The meeting began with the usual pleasantries: upcoming bake sales, new STEM lab equipment funded by generous donations, Then the principal cleared his throat, his voice hardening. Due to rising operational costs and to maintain our schools' standards, we are enforcing stricter policies regarding mandatory activity fees. Non-payment will regrettably result in exclusion from extracurriculars, special classes, and off-campus educational trips. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a few nodding in approval. Carla's stomach twisted. Those fees were already months overdue. The consequences struck swiftly. The very next week, Ethan came home unusually quiet, his soccer cleats dangling by their laces. When Carla gently prodded, he confessed the coach had told him he couldn't stay on the team until their fees were cleared. Soccer had been Ethan's brightest outlet, a place where thrift clothes and last year's textbooks didn't matter. Where he was, just another boy chasing a ball across sunlit grass. Now, even that small joy was stripped away. Determined, Carlos scraped together courage she didn't feel and marched to the school office the following morning. The receptionist barely looked up as Carla explained, her voice cracking, that she needed more time, that she was trying her best, juggling 2 jobs. Moments later, an assistant administrator appeared, lips tight, eyes cool. "We understand it's difficult, Ms. Miller, but the policy is clear. If these fees continue unpaid, the matter will be turned over to collections. That could impact your credit, your housing. Surely you understand the importance of compliance." Carla's composure shattered. Outside the office door, she sank onto a hard bench, hands trembling as she clutched her purse like a lifeline. Tears spilled unchecked. She felt hollowed out by shame, imagining Ethan's face when she'd have to explain why he couldn't go on field trips or rejoin soccer, how even his small dreams were slipping through her weary fingers. She was still there, struggling to calm her breathing, when Mrs. Eleanor Grant walked past on her way to a routine board meeting. Eleanor paused, hearing the muffled sobs. Her eyes sharpened with recognition at the mention of the Miller name echoing faintly from inside the office. Could this distraught mother be connected to the little boy who had so kindly carried her? Groceries? Her chest tightened as she remembered Ethan's shy smile and small hands gripping that heavy bag. Inside, the board convened around polished oak tables, oblivious to the heartbreak just beyond the door. They discussed tightening the policy, further perhaps even starting early legal action to recover unpaid fees. "It sets a precedent," one trustee argued, tapping his pen against a spreadsheet. "We can't allow delinquencies to compromise our programs." Eleanor sat rigid, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. The thought of sending debt collectors after families like Carlos twisted something raw and painful inside her. She remembered her mother hiding from landlords, the nights she'd gone to bed hungry under patched quilts. How far she'd command, how cruelly far removed she'd allowed herself to become. Meanwhile, Carla left the building with her head bowed, cheeks still damp, feeling smaller than she ever had. That night in their cramped apartment, Ethan pretended to do homework at the coffee table, stealing glances at his mother as she stood by the kitchen sink, whispering tearful apologies to a stack of unpaid bills as though they were people she'd wronged. He heard the tremor in her voice, saw her shoulders quake, and something in him crumpled too. Across town, Eleanor lay awake in her grand bed, the chandeliers above casting fractured shadows. The boy's earnest eyes haunted her. Muffled weeping echoed in her mind. For the first time in many years, she questioned not just the policies of the school she helped govern, but the very nature of the legacy she would one day leave behind. Her conscience stirred, uncomfortably awake, as though urging her to finally, truly do something. The letter came on a Thursday, slipped under their apartment door in a crisp white envelope that seemed almost mocking in its neatness. Carla tore it open with trembling hands and read the cold legal jargon 3 times before the words truly sank in. Asterisk small claims court, wage garnishment, legal fees, asterisk. Her throat closed up, bile rising as she imagined losing what little she had left. They could barely afford groceries now. Every extra hour at the diner or the cleaning company only bought them another bag of rice, another carton of eggs, stretched to feed them for days. The thought of someone siphoning off even a few dollars from her paycheck made her chest tighten so painfully she had to sit down. That night she stared at the ceiling long after Ethan's soft snores filled the room, the letter clenched in her fist until it crumpled. Determined not to let everything unravel, Carla signed up for every extra shift she could grab. Some days she worked straight through from dawn until past midnight, her legs aching, her hands raw from bleach and scalding dishwater. She would come home to find Ethan already asleep on the couch, his spelling lists strewn around him like fallen leaves. Guilt gnawed at her each time she brushed sweaty hair from his forehead and whispered an apology he never heard. But what choice did she have? The alternative was a courtroom, creditors, and then no roof at all. Meanwhile, at Greenwood, Ethan's bright spark dulled. His stomach twisted in anxious knots. So often he stopped eating lunch altogether, pushing away the cafeteria tray even when Ms. Daniels gently coaxed him. The Whispers were worst boys from the soccer team, led by Trevor, would snicker as he passed. Guest charity cases can't afford cleats anymore, they'd say. Laughter following him down the hall like gnats. Ms. Daniels tried to offer him small kindnesses, letting him stay in from recess to read, pressing an extra sandwich into his hands. But Ethan only forced a smile, because how could he explain that he lay awake each night worrying about rent and courtrooms, not multiplication tables? Far removed from these daily humiliations, Mrs. Eleanor Grant's curiosity had blossomed into grave concern. Unable to quiet the echo of Carla's sobs or Ethan's earnest face that morning with the groceries, she requested Ethan's student records under the pretense of reviewing new scholarship opportunities. What she found disturbed her deeply. His attendance was nearly perfect, his grades strong despite obvious hardships. Notes from Ms. Daniels mentioned possible food insecurity, fatigue, and anxious behavior. A few discreet calls uncovered even more Carla's to grueling jobs. The family's frequent threats of eviction, and to Eleanor's growing horror, evidence that the school board had been quietly diverting certain charitable endowment funds intended to help struggling families, funneling them instead into flashy new landscaping and exclusive donor events. At the next formal board dinner, Eleanor sat ramrod straight at the long table draped in starched linen, the clink of fine silverware around her almost deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the polite chatter like a blade. "We're sitting on hundreds of thousands meant for scholarships and hardship grants, yet we're threatening lawsuits over a few $100s in activity fees." The room went cold. A trustee with a tore-red face sniffed dismissively. "Eleanor, you know how it works. If we start bending rules, every undesirable in town will think Greenwood is a handout program. Our reputation, our exclusivity relies on firm standards." Murmured agreements followed. Eleanor swallowed her fury behind a brittle smile, nodding along just enough to deflect suspicion. Inside, she burned with indignation, already formulating her own plan in the quiet, private chambers of her heart. Back in their cramped apartment, Carla's world finally splintered. The landlord's latest notice was bright orange, impossible to ignore on their door. 3 days to pay or vacate. When she read it, something inside her cracked. That evening, as she washed their few chipped dishes, Ethan accidentally knocked a plate from the counter. It shattered on the floor, and the sound seemed to echo all the way through her bones. "Ethan, can't you be careful for once?" she snapped, voice sharper than she intended. His eyes filled instantly with tears, and guilt swamped her. She sank to the linoleum and pulled him into her lap, sobbing into his hair. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault," Ethan pressed. his small hands against her back, trying to be brave even as his own tears fell. I can get a job, Mom. Maybe walk dogs or mow lawns. I can help. His voice cracked on the last word. Carla hugged him tighter, rocking them both. You're just a little boy, she whispered fiercely. I'm supposed to fix this. I'm supposed to take care of you, not the other way around. In those fragile moments, fear, shame, love, and desperation wove together so tightly that neither of them could tell where one feeling ended and another began. It was all Carla could do to hold Ethan and promise that somehow they'd get through. This, though in truth, she didn't know how. Across town, in her mansion, lit by glittering chandeliers, Eleanor lay awake at den, haunted by a 10-year-old shy smile and the knowledge that her own fortune could change everything if only she found the courage to use it. In the heavy dark, her heart stirred with a determination she hadn't felt in decades. Something was going to give. It had to. The letter came on a Tuesday morning, slipped under their apartment door with the same quiet finality that had announced eviction threats and court warnings. Carla spotted it when she returned from her dawn shift, her heart immediately plunging. Hands shaking, she tore it open, bracing herself for more demands she couldn't meet. But as her eyes scanned the elegant, embossed letterhead, her breath caught. It wasn't a bill or a summons. It was an official invitation, warm, hopeful words that she had to read twice to believe. Ethan Miller was being offered a full scholarship at Greenwood Elementary. Not just tuition, but all activity fees, books, meals, uniforms, even transportation. Every burden that had weighed on her shoulders for years was suddenly lifted in black and white assurances, signed with an elegant flourish by Eleanor Grant herself. The letter slipped from Carla's hands as she collapsed onto the couch, sobs racking her body. This time they weren't tears of shame or fear, but of overwhelming, almost disbelieving relief. She clutched the letter to her chest like a lifeline, whispering over and over, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," to whoever might be listening. The following week at school, Ethan was summoned to the front office. His stomach churned. Every summons lately felt like it might be more bad news, another way they'd be told he didn't belong. Head down, he shuffled into the office and stopped short. Sitting there, serene and warm-eyed, in a tailored navy coat, was Mrs. Grant. It took a heartbeat before recognition lit his face. The kind old woman from the sidewalk, the one whose groceries he'd carried that morning. He nearly missed his test. Mrs. Grant rose, her smile tender. "Hello, Ethan. Do you remember me?" He nodded, wide-eyed. "I never forgot your kindness," she said, her voice catching slightly. "That small moment showed me more about the heart of this school than any of our glossy brochures. You reminded me what we're supposed to stand for: children helping one another, community, compassion, things I fear we've lost sight of." Then she laid a gentle hand on his shoulder, her eyes glistening. "I want you to know your scholarship isn't charity. It's an overdue correction. You deserve to be here, fully, without worry. And because of you, we're changing everything's, so no other child feels they're less than enough." Ethan's throat tightened so he could only nod, tears blurring his vision. As Mrs. Grant left, he felt for the first time that someone powerful truly saw him, not as a burden, but as a spark worth nurturing. Days later, the same board that had sneered at undesirables found themselves seated around their polished table under the stern gazes of past trustees' portraits. Eleanor stood at the head of the room, papers fanned before her like weapons. Her tone was calm but sharp enough to cut. This institution was founded on ideals of community, uplift, and educational opportunity for all. Somewhere along the way, we twisted that into elitism, into safeguarding privileges for the already privileged. A trustee tried to interject about balancing budgets and donor expectations, but Eleanor raised a hand, silencing him. "Enough, I am rewriting the Trust's charter. Effective immediately, a significant portion of our endowment will fund comprehensive scholarships, nutrition programs, and outreach for low-income families. If you disagree, you're welcome to resign, but understand that our contracts and positions will reflect this new priority. Permanently, uneasy glances darted around the table. The same people who'd once brushed her off now shifted in their seats, faces paling at the prospect of lost stipends and reputations tarnished by public resignations. In the tense silence that followed, Eleanor leaned forward slightly. We will be the school that welcomes and uplifts, or we will not be. Greenwood at all. Slowly, reluctantly, the board members nodded, forced to accept that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted outside those panelled walls. Change unfurled like morning light. Letters went out announcing expanded scholarship programs, activity. Fees were waived for families in need, and lunch accounts were replenished with anonymous donations under Eleanor's careful orchestration. At home, Carla clutched Ethan tight each evening, marveling at how different life felt without the crushing fear of the next bill. Ethan returned to soccer practices, grinning as he laced up new cleats provided through a quiet grant, his laughter echoing across the field. And Eleanor, watching from a bench nearby, felt something inside her mend. Power once wielded to protect Ivory Towers was now a tool to open doors wide. Thanks to one small boy's spontaneous kindness and the fierce love of a mother who fought to keep him afloat, the entire world of Greenwood Elementary began to blossom into something truer, fairer, and infinitely more human. Carla stood nervously outside the sunlit cafe, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles ached. When Mrs. Grant waved her over to a cozy corner table, she approached with hesitant steps. But from the moment Eleanor took her hands in greeting, warmth seemed to seep through every worry Carla carried. Over steaming mugs of coffee, the older woman shared stories Carla never expected, how she'd grown up in a cramped house with peeling paint, raised by a seamstress mother who skipped meals to keep the lights on. Eleanor spoke softly of scrubbing floors alongside her mother, of reading borrowed books late into the night by borrowed lamps. She confessed that when her late husband's investments had flourished beyond anything she'd dreamed, she promised herself she'd never forget where she came from. But I did forget, Carla, Eleanor admitted, voice cracking. I surrounded myself with polished people and polished things, until your son's small act of kindness reminded me what actually matters. It pierced right through the loneliness I didn't even realize was swallowing me. Carla wiped away tears, overwhelmed by a gratitude that went deeper than words. All I ever wanted was a fair chance for Ethan. You've given him so much more than that. I promise I'll keep working hard. I want him to see that. But just knowing he won't be held back because of me, ... That's the greatest gift I could ever imagine. Eleanor squeezed her hand, eyes bright. I think we're all going to learn from Ethan. He's changed more than you know. Life began to stretch and brighten in ways Carla hadn't dared hope. Ethan rejoined the soccer team, proudly pulling on a crisp new uniform with the school crest stitched neatly over his heart. The first time he scored a goal, he scanned the sidelines, grinning when he spotted his mother cheering wildly, hands cupped around her mouth. Later, he lingered in the school library until dusk, leafing through thick textbooks with an eagerness that made Carla's chest swell every time she picked him up. At school, Mrs. Grant was no longer just a name on the building's dedication plaque. She visited classrooms, sat cross-legged among first graders during story time, applauded raucously at student art shows. She quietly funded a reading initiative that stocked the library with hundreds of new books, and an arts program that brought in local painters and musicians. Children who'd once been overlooked blossomed under her attention, their laughter trailing down hallways that had felt cold and exclusive not long before. Back in their little apartment, Carla found herself humming as she cooked. The eviction notices had stopped. Bills were no longer stacked in precarious towers of dread. She paid down old debts, one careful envelope at a time, and with each cleared balance, it felt like a stone lifted off her chest. There were still long days and stubborn worries. Those never disappeared entirely. But without the constant panic of losing everything, Carla could breathe again, could sit with Ethan over his homework without her mind racing through unpaid balances, could brush hair from his forehead and whisper how proud she was, truly meaning it without the sharp edge of guilt. Sometimes, late at night, she'd catch Ethan at the window, staring out with quiet wonder. "What are you thinking about, baby?" she'd ask. He'd grin and shrugged. Just ... the future. And for the first time in years, Carla could smile back without fear, because now the future was wide open, bright as a sunlit field, ready for Ethan to run across it, unburdened and free. Years later, beneath a canopy of bright summer sky, Ethan stood at the podium in his crisp graduation gown, the gold valedictorian sash gleaming across his chest. His hands trembled just slightly as he adjusted the microphone, scanning the sea of faces until he found Carla in the front row, eyes already shining with tears, and just behind her, Mrs. Grant, smaller and frailer now, but still radiating that gentle, indomitable warmth. Ethan took a steadying breath. "I've been asked to speak today about perseverance, about dreams," he began, his voice catching. "But all I can think about is how one small act of kindness changed my entire life. Years ago, I helped someone with their groceries, not knowing it would lead to someone helping me, and countless other kids, in ways I couldn't imagine. Thank you, Mrs. Grant, for believing in kids like me when the world too often doesn't. You gave us more than education. You gave us hope." Carla broke into quiet sobs, her shoulders shaking as she pressed a hand to her mouth. Beside her, Mrs. Grant's smile was luminous, though her thin hands trembled slightly as she clutched a delicate gold locket at her chest. Inside was a tiny photograph of the weathered house she'd grown up in, a reminder of the winding road from poverty to power, and of how that journey had found its truest purpose in helping another boy reach beyond what he ever thought possible. When the ceremony ended, Ethan stepped down from the stage and crossed straight to Mrs. Grant, folding her into a hug that was tender and fierce all at once. Tears slipped down both their faces, mingling with quiet laughter that spoke of triumph, of debts repaid not in money but in the shared knowledge that their lives, once lonely and uncertain, had been irrevocably changed by simple human grace. In that embrace, past and future seemed to meet a circle finally complete.